I'm sure he will have the very best surgeons, the very best surgical team around him that have obviously identified this at the London clinic and have now presumably made the arrangements for a full operation.
Right.
Or perhaps the operation that he's had already will be definitive and will be enough to cure the symptoms that he's had.
Yes.
I don't know quite how these things work. Fortunately, I never had to find out. But I imagine that one visit will probably be better than two. And if they've managed to eradicate the whole thing in one go, I'm sure there'll be relief all round.
Well, we need to pause in this respect. We do not know what the form of the cancer is. The statement talks about him returning to duty as soon as possible, but taking time off. We know from all we've heard so far that they were said to be dealing with an enlargement of the prostate, which is a less serious condition. Now, Jack Blackburn now joins me in the studio, and you may have more for us. History correspondent at the Times. Jack, can you tell us more?
Simply, the Palace has confirmed that it is not prostate cancer.
It's not.
They're not going any further, not releasing any details on that, but they have confirmed that it is not prostate cancer.
Okay, well then we now know from the Palace, as you report, Jack, that we're not talking about a prostate cancer, which is, well, it is quite a common condition among men. It's a very common condition among older men, and we're seeing here the statement from Buckingham Palace, which tells us that this other condition was not part of that process. It was not part of the process of treating an enlarged prostate.
It was certainly discovered in the course of treating that.
In the course of that.
That is all the detail that we have.
Right. Okay. So now we wait to find out what the condition is as and when we can discover that. We know the King is now taking time for treatment of that condition. What does that mean for the role of the King and the work for the King in the immediate and short term?
The message from the Palace in this seems to be pretty clear, that you may not see the captain of the ship of state, to use a cliche, for the next few months, but he's still got his hand on the tiller. And in most years, one might go, well, that is, what is that, a few Privy Council meetings, that is the quotidian role of the constitutional monarch. It's not that important, but it's an election year. And in this particular calendar year, it is actually very important constitutionally to make it clear that the monarch is still the monarch. It's just that he's not going about meeting people. And there may well be instances, depending on how the treatment goes, when the constitution kicks in and the monarch has to appoint councillors of state to discharge his role. But in an election year, there are further complications to that if that should happen. So it is even more important that this is the case. There has in fact been one earlier instance in the current legislation when an election was called when the monarch was absent, not through illness, but in February of 1974. Elizabeth II was abroad, and an election was called by Ted Heath in a snap election, and this caught the monarchy on the hop. And in that instance, the Queen Mother and Princess Margaret, on the express instructions of Elizabeth II, dissolved Parliament. Her Majesty then hot-footed it back to Britain to make sure she was in place for the conclusion of the election, though actually, constitutionally, she didn't have to do that. The appointment of a government, actually, as it turns out, doesn't have to be done by the monarch in certain circumstances.
Okay.
But that's the one historical precedent we have.
Thank you, Jack. I mean, do stay with us if you can. Just to recap on this really important story, breaking literally in the last few moments. King Charles has been diagnosed with cancer. A statement from Buckingham Palace in the last few moments tells us the condition was discovered in the course of his treatment at the Royal London Hospital for a prostate enlargement. That led to a diagnosis we now know from Jack Blackburn, Times correspondent here with me in the studio. The diagnosis was of another form of cancer, not prostate cancer. The statement from Buckingham Palace tells us that the King has been advised by doctors to postpone public-facing duties. It also tells us, and I'm quoting now, throughout this period, His Majesty will continue to undertake state business and official paperwork as usual. And Jack Blackburn, you managed to add to that to the extent of telling us he will be carrying out public-facing duties, but will still involve retiring from the front line and public duties, you say, for a matter of months.
Well, we don't. That is an assumption of mine. I assume that if we are going into a treatment for cancer, it's not weeks. Bring me the person who recovers from cancer in a few weeks, and you show me a very lucky man. it is likely to be a lengthy period out. I think that's also one of the reasons why the decision's been taken to reveal this diagnosis, because people would notice this year of all years. But yes, it is likely to be a lengthy period, and we will see how that progresses. Obviously, the palace is trying to strike a very careful balance between giving enough information to stop there being wild speculation,
Yes.
whilst also retaining King Charles's right to personal privacy.
Yeah, but now this news has been released. Now this story has broken, Jack. There will be quite enormous interest in the condition of the king and what he is facing and what his medical team will be able to and will do in these coming weeks and conceivably months to come. Now, we hear then the king is going to be carrying out state business and official paperwork as usual. What will the king be doing then behind the doors and the walls of royal residences during this time?
I think the likelihood is that he'll be reading his red boxes. They've made a very clear statement about that. He will be discharging his conduct at Privy Council meetings.
So holding meetings with politicians,
Yeah.
Prime Minister regular audience, that kind of thing.
Yes, the Prime Minister's regular audience will continue. Obviously, treatments for cancer can have a big impact on a person's immune system, and there may well be periods of time when it's not wise for him to be in the room in person. We have just come off the back of a pandemic where there was mechanisms put in place to ensure that people were able to have these meetings without being in the same room as each other and to
Yes.
stop the spread of infection. So one can fully expect those meetings to continue with the monarch in charge, whilst he is maybe incapacitated due to treatment to do things physically, but is mentally completely sound and compos mentis.
Well, we can hope and hope that the recovery is quick, the treatment is successful, and the king comes through this difficult period as soon as possible and as well as possible. Duties have to go on though when it comes to the royal household. They have duties. I wonder what will happen when it comes to the royal diary. Will we see other members of the royal household stepping up and picking up the slack, as it were?
Yes, one can imagine that there are already indications in the palace that the Queen is going to be spending time supporting her husband, so her roles may be impacted as well. But I'm also sure that she will endeavour to show that things carry on as well. There has been a shift in the way that the royal family is managed. There are these roles called councillors of state, which are governed by legislation, and that is a stopgap for if a monarch is actually not able to discharge their duties, which we're not yet at.
And just take us through that sort of contingency. What does that look like, Jack?
The king, if he knew he was going to be unable to discharge his duties, would issue letters patent. This happens a lot. This happens when monarchs have been abroad. It's perfectly normal constitutional mechanism. And in that instance, what would happen is that the councillors of state, who are the monarch's spouse and the 4 top adults in the line of succession, that's adult defined as above 21, and that has been added the Duke of Edinburgh and the Princess Royal. They have been added so as to ensure that the Duke of Sussex and the Duke of York are they are still councillors of state, but we've made it so that their duties are not required for reasons which are perhaps quite obvious to listeners.
Yeah.
Now, that could be issued if things took a turn, but they have made it very clear that there are no plans to do this. However, you can fully expect that those councillors of state will be stepping into the breach for the ceremonial public duties, the going out, meeting people, opening things, the PR element of it, the ceremonial element of it, to an extent, anything which doesn't actually require the power of the monarch.
Yes.
There is a team of understudies who are ready to go at any given time.
Yeah, and we're talking about contingencies now because we don't know how long King Charles is going to require treatment for the cancer which he has, how long it will take him away from his normal duties, how much it will limit, after a period, what he's able to do at all. And we're moving, as you say, into an election period, which is still, one presumes, some months away, and the ceremonial that goes with all of that, maybe a little bit further down the line still. But they will have in mind those really important, high-profile duties when they're making their plans.
Well, yes, and one wonders whether in the weekly audience, the King and the Prime Minister have had a conversation about what date the election's going to be. I'm sure that Rishi Sunak is not necessarily going to be swayed by the monarch's health, and the monarch wouldn't want Rishi Sunak to be swayed by his health.